What up, everybody? And today we are breaking down all the greatest children's horror ever made. So what up, fam? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Miles of Horror, the only channel that's going to make you scream. Appreciate you guys hanging out as always. Tons of engagement lately. Let's get to 400 subs. We just hit 370 this morning. So if you guys would be so kind as to hit that like button and please subscribe to my channel. The more likes videos get, the more it gets spread out to your algorithms, the more love my videos get. So appreciate y'all hanging out, dropping comments, hitting those like buttons, slamming those like buttons, unleashing those like buttons, all that good stuff. And let's get into today's topic. We're talking children's horror. You can see my background there, Hocus Pocus style. Now there's so much great children's horror out there, but I'm gonna take you guys through what I think is arguably some of the greatest. I think I have 5 titles here, or 5 things rather, because they're not all movies, but 5 of the greatest things that are out there that are children's horror. It could be a movie, a show that, in my opinion, were just perfect. And every child should watch, but it really is just a perfect example of children's horror. And I'm going to give you my reasons why, give you a little background information, and all that good stuff on children's horror, etc. So right off the bat, you can see my background. I have some deep cuts. I have some obvious ones, but right off the back, in my opinion, one of the greatest children's horror movies ever made. Number 1 on this list, or the first one I'm going with, rather. These are not in any particular order, but the first one I'm going with is none other than 1993's horror masterpiece, and I don't say that term lightly, Hocus Pocus.
300 years later, it's Halloween Eve, and they're back.
We're home.
Now, a couple really interesting things that I learned about Hocus Pocus in my research. If you could believe it or not, there are things that I didn't know about this movie. I kind of shocked myself. But before I get into that, I own this movie on VHS, which is probably my preferred way to watch it. It's just 1993 is just perfect for VHS. I have 2 Blu-rays. I have the standard Disney Blu-ray with the slip, and then I have the Steelbook edition of Book. This was a gift from my sister for my 32nd birthday, maybe. But anyway, so I have this movie in 3 different editions. It's one of my all-time faves. Now, this movie came out in 1993 to mixed reviews. Okay, it was a box office bomb, guys. If you didn't know that, this thing bombed. Okay, it was not a smash hit. It lost Disney $16.5 million during its theatrical run. That was a little shocking to me. I knew it wasn't like a immediate success, but to lose Disney $16.5 million to be what it is today is kind of, it's a wild kind of path to success. But anyway, it came out in 1993, which was a very bizarre year for horror. Full Moon was really doing its thing. So listen to these movies from 1993. Body Bags, Body Melt, bizarre movie. Carnosaur, Children of the Corn 2, Dark Half, Dollman vs. Demonic Toys, Jason Goes to Hell, Leprechaun, Needful Things, Puppet Master 4, Return of the Living Dead 3, Skeeter and Subspecies 2. So a lot of Full Moon going down that year. And you had Hocus Pocus. So it was a pretty interesting year for horror. But anyway, premise of Hocus Pocus, if you haven't seen it, but I'm guessing if you're watching my channel, you are privy to this movie, you have seen it, but maybe you need a little refresher course. Good old Thackeray Binks sees his sister Emily follow the old Sanderson sisters into the woods. She goes missing, of course. The Sanderson sisters suck her soul dry and good old Thackeray Binks gets turned into a cat. Now, 300 years later, which is the main focus of the movie, Virgin Max Dennison. Can we talk about that for a second? Because the fact that they actually put that out there in a children's horror movie, I definitely didn't know what a virgin was when I saw this movie when I was a kid, but they went there to give you a little idea of a sign of the times of how different things were. But Virgin Max Dennison lights the black flame candle, dubbing it all a bunch of hocus pocus in the process, and the Sanderson sisters come back to wreak havoc on the town of Salem, and the children of Salem suck the lives of the children of Salem. That was my Winifred for you. Fools, all of you! But anyway, Hocus Pocus is actually scary. It is an actually scary movie. I mean, their whole goal is to suck the souls from children. Okay. Again, and they refer to Max Dennison as a virgin throughout the movie. I mean, they weren't holding back any of the stops in this movie. They went there, and there were so many things that would probably not fly today. I mean, Billy Butcherson was a very creepy character. There was just a lot of sexual innuendos from Sarah Jessica Parker. So it's just one of those movies that is kind of like a genre period, and the second one sucked ass so bad, and I knew going into it there was no possible way they can recreate that kind of magic, especially in children's horror. When it comes to children, studios are being so careful these days, and it's really shitty because something like Hocus Pocus just can't happen again. But anyway, Hocus Pocus, one of the greatest horror movies ever made, truly. If you have not seen it in a while, do yourself a favor, go back and watch it because it's just so good. It's in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. So while I don't have this list necessarily mapped out 1 through 5, it could be my number 1 here. But there's some other goodies. So next up, let me take you guys back to 1992. Now, this wasn't a movie. This was a show, and in my opinion, better than Goosebumps. And in my opinion, the greatest children's horror show ever made. Arguably the greatest horror anthology ever made. Tales from the Crypt gives it a run for its money, but they're very close. And that is none other than the legendary Nickelodeon children's horror series, Are You Afraid of the Dark? I mean, just that opening scene alone with the boat creaking and the swing set at night swinging, I mean, it struck fear into the heart of every child and early teen of the early 90s for years and years. So if you are not familiar with the show, it was an early 90s horror anthology series on Nickelodeon, nonetheless, centered around a group of teens who called themselves the Midnight Society and would meet once a week around a campfire to tell a spooky story. Now, what's funny is, I'm putting this out there, and I'm assuming everyone knows what this is, but it came out so long ago at this point, 33 years, that, there's probably so many of you out there that maybe don't know it. And I know they've done a remake, but maybe you don't really know how influential this show really was and how popular this show really was and how many people this scared, how many kids this scared. So they would meet around a campfire and tell a spooky story, which in and of itself is a really cool premise. But it originally aired from August 15th, 1992, and it went all the way to February 3rd, 1996. So it had about a 4-year episodic television run, but the pilot episode, and this was interesting to me, I didn't know this, it actually aired 2 years prior. So the very first pilot episode actually aired on Halloween of 1990. Okay, and that was the tale of the Twisted Claw. Now, if you haven't seen that episode, it's a very creepy and very cool episode about 2 adolescents who go trick-or-treating on Halloween, and they go to an elderly lady's house, and she gifts them this claw, and it's a talisman, and it's kind of I want to say it's loosely based on Edgar Allan Poe's the Claw, I think it's called. But anyway, and they are granted 3 wishes, and all hell breaks loose. And at one point, if you haven't seen the episode, their parents, I think their parent disappear. It is like very, very creepy. And that whole 90s children's horror trope of kids feeling isolated and alone and scared is very prevalent in this episode. So almost every episode ever had something to love. Truly, it's just an iconic show, with some of the most famous episodes being the Tale of the Ghastly Grinner. Now, if you haven't seen Tale of the Ghastly Grinner, it's arguably the greatest children's episodic piece of all time. I have the something just dropped. I have the original. What just fell? Oh, I have the original Sylvester Uncas created Ghastly Grinner 1 of 1 comic book. And if you know, you know. This is one of my favorite pieces of memorabilia. I absolutely love Are You Afraid of the Dark? I love the Ghastly Grinner. One of my next tattoos I'm thinking about getting is the Ghastly Grinner. So anyway, yeah, I have that framed comic. I also have the bootleg Blu-ray of the show. Unfortunately, it never received a true release. I don't even know if the full series was ever. I think the full series was done on DVD at some point, but I never got it. Maybe I should invest. But I have the whole series on Blu-ray bootleg. It's working for me right now. And so, some of the greatest episodes: Tell of the Ghastly Grinner, Tale of Dead Man's Float, Tale of the Doll Maker, some of the classics. Now, I know so many different people are impartial to different episodes. Those are some of my favorites. I also love Tale of the Vacant Lot, which, by the way, I'm going to do an episode on later, but I had to believe that Tale of the Vacant Lot was a heavy influence for the movie The Substance. But that is neither here nor there. Now, what's really cool about Are You Afraid of the Dark is that, yes, it was children's horror, but it aired at the 9:30 spot on Snick at Night. Now, if you're not familiar with what Snick at Night is, let's take it back. Snick at Night was the Orange Couch vibe. Okay, now I believe it was Friday night or maybe Saturday night, from 8 to 10. Okay, there'd be Snick at Night, which was basically teens would gather on an orange couch and watch 4 TV shows together. It was like Clarissa Explains It All, maybe Alex Mack, something else, and then Are You Afraid of the Dark at the 9:30 spot. And me and my cousins would all stay up and watch Are You Afraid of the Dark, and we'd be terrified, truly terrified. Just the intro alone. So Are You Afraid of the Dark is just iconic, and it was for children of that time period. Again, I was born in 1986, so I was like a poster child for the show. It was like the show that we weren't technically supposed to watch, but we did anyway. But it was okay because it was meant for kids, right? And that's what was so unique about the show, is that it was terrifying and scary, but it wasn't really. It was meant for us, and it was still scary. So Are You Afraid of the Dark is really as legendary as it gets. Huge part of my childhood. So if you haven't checked it out, you haven't seen some of those back episodes, go check them out, because almost all of them have something to love. They are excellent. Moving right along in the 3 spot. Again, these are not in any particular order, but just in my 3 spot for today, none other than the legendary Ernest P. Worrell, Jim Varney classic. Okay, and probably the scariest children's horror movie ever made. Good old Ernest. Scared Stupid.
I sure hope you're from Keebler.
That he must become.
I am Troll Fighter #1.
Troll Fighter #1. Now, I own Ernest a few different ways. I have the VHS tape, classic artwork right there. Really one of my favorite posters of all time. I have the DVD. And I have the Blu-ray, of course. So legendary movie, legendary artwork, easily my favorite Ernest movie. And really, quite frankly, the greatest. It's this, in my opinion, the scariest children's horror movie ever made. But that's in my opinion. I'm sure there's others that disagree. But anyway, Ernest came out October 11th, 1991. It grossed $14.1 million. Big success. Ernest P. Worrell's great ancestor to capture and subdue the terrifying Trantor the Troll, cursing him into the ground for a century. Now, of course, Ernest and his stupidity managed to unleash Trantor the Troll 100 years later. It's wacky, it's zany, it's fun, it's funny, but above all else, Ernest Scared Stupid is just terrifying. You know, it's just it was one of those things that for me, there's very few things out there that shaped my love of horror more than Ernest Scared Stupid. You know, as far as shaping what I love about horror, it's like Ernest Scared Stupid and Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I like that kind of zany body horror-ish type. Now, Trantor is, in my opinion, the scariest children's monster of all time. He runs around trying to cast his evil troll magic onto the children, which turns them into little wooden dolls, which to me was like as terrifying as it gets. I'm really into transformative horror and body horror and that kind of concept of the unswitchbackable, right? You're a wooden doll forever, and that's it. It was so terrifying to me as a kid. Now, one thing that's also important to realize is that the Kyoto brothers. Now, if you're not familiar with who they are the producers, writers, directors, and practical effects maestros of the famous Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which is in my top 3 favorite movies of all time. They did the practical effects and makeup and masks and trolls stuff for Killer Ernest Scared Stupid. So you can actually Google it. I should have grabbed it for the video. But you can actually Google and see the kind of recycled masks that they use for Ernest Scared Stupid, or for Killer Clowns rather, in Ernest Scared Stupid. It's very cool. So you know, there's a reason why I love the effects of Trantor and the trolls and all of that, and it's because the Kyoto brothers did it. Their touch is all over it. And so, Ernest Scared Stupid is just one of the most legendary children's horror movies ever made. And again, in my opinion, the scariest children's horror movie ever made. And it's even scary for adults. It confuses, you know, it kind of like it confuses you a little bit because it's wacky and zany and fun and funny, but at the same time, at its core, it's terrifying. And so their way of making it a children's movie was to keep it lighthearted and keep it zany when a Trantor wasn't around. And Ernest does a really good job of that. But again, the movie itself and Trantor is just terrifying. So it's kind of like extreme highs and lows in that sense. Extreme comedy, but extreme horror as well. So it's kind of interesting, the dichotomy in this movie of extremes. So definitely check out Ernest Scared Stupid if you haven't already. Slapstick comedy, so much fun. Halloween based, terrifying. Next up, you know, I mentioned earlier, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Right around the same time period, another Canadian show came about with a lot of the same actors and actresses from Are You Afraid of the Dark? And it was based on the best-selling children's series of all time, the best-selling children's author of all time, one of the greatest-selling authors of all time, and that was none other than Goosebumps, and The Haunted Mask specifically. Now, I'm not even referring to the entire show. There were some great episodes, had a couple great seasons, but in some of the later seasons, it got a little wacky and zany, and kind of some of the special effects were you know. But as far as I'm concerned, The Haunted Mask itself, okay, which aired originally on October 27th, 1995. I believe it was a Wednesday. So and if I'm not mistaken, I've told the story in other streams before, but it aired on a Wednesday, I believe. And my buddy Matt and I recorded it on Wednesday, and on Friday, on Halloween, we went trick or treating. I'm sorry, maybe it was a Tuesday, whatever it is, or a Monday, and then on Friday we went trick or treating. We watched the recording of The Haunted Mask, and I have it still somewhere, that recording. We went trick or treating, and we came back to my house and watched it. Now, it's a fantastic book. It's a fantastic tale about old scaredy cat Carly Beth, who is tired of always being scared, and in her grief, steals an old mask at a bizarre antique store, and turns out the mask is evil, and it attaches itself to her face, and it's the whole the whole story that ensues with what happens when she puts on the mask and she becomes something completely different than who she is. And it's a terrifying tale of self-acceptance and self-love and the monster within us all, and not to let it get the best of us. Very substancy vibes, but if it is, in my opinion, one of the scariest and greatest horror things put on television put on screen ever made. Now, if you have not read the book, I suggest doing so as well. But R.L. Stein's The Haunted Mask is as legendary as it gets, and I'm a big fan. So if you have not checked it out, I have the VHS. I also have the Goosebumps DVD set from Australia, the complete set. But definitely check it out. It is iconic, and it is as legendary as it gets. Now, I'm gonna wrap up here today with a bonus feature. Now, I did a whole video on this on this movie, and I did it because I feel like not enough people talk about it. But in my opinion, it is one of the scariest children's horror movies ever made. And that is a Disney classic called Don't Look Under the Bed. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because I did a whole video on it. If you want to know more, check out that video. But essentially, it's about childhood best friends and imaginary friend and the boogeyman, and what could happen if you stop believing in your imaginary friends and start believing in the boogeyman. And again, this was kind of like that same kind of vibe where this was really scary, and I go over it in detail in my other video, but so scary to the point that it was actually banned from the Disney Channel. So many parents complained and called in that it was too scary that they actually banned it. So there you have it, guys. Five horror movies, shows that were put out that are some of the greatest and scariest things ever put on film or TV, what have you. So I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Do you guys agree with some of this list? Are there things you've seen here that you completely agree with? Are there things you think here that are just not that scary? Has any of this not aged very well and this hasn't held up really well? Hit me up in the comments. Do you have any others that maybe should have made this list? Hit me up. Let's talk children's horror and the scariest ones that have ever been put out. And I appreciate you guys hanging out, and I'll catch you on the flip. Peace.